Welcome. It's another dirt road journey. Stories to learn from in life and business. I'm Rob Deptford. I'm excited for my guest today. She's a communications consultant, so it's a topic that's a little bit near and dear to my own heart. And she is in mainland China. We'll get her to explain where she is because it was confusing to me to start with. But it sounds like a very vibrant city where she's currently doing business. She's a former marketer, or a current marketer, I guess, and comes from filmmaking as well. She's worked with Fortune 500 companies. She's done a TEDx talk now and doing communication consulting now as kind of her main gig. Nausheen, Ishtiaq, Chen. Did I get that right?
Yes. Yeah, you got that perfectly right. Thank you. Hi,
Hey,
Rob.
welcome. I'm glad to have you on the program.
Thank you. It's awesome being here. It's amazing talking to you. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so the city where you are,
hmm
Shenzhen, is that right?
Yeah, you pronounced it. Yeah, absolutely the right way. Pretty much, absolutely.
And this is, you were telling me before we started recording, this is mainland China, but you can pretty much see Hong Kong out your window.
Oh, yeah. So we're in the south. We're right next to Hong Kong. Like you can walk over to Hong Kong. You could have walked over to Hong Kong in better days, pre-COVID. Now it's much harder with the quarantine and everything. And we're the third largest city after Beijing and Shanghai in China. We're probably one of the fastest growing startup ecosystems in Asia, if not the world. And yeah, it's a very dynamic, vibrant city. A lot of the huge Chinese tech companies are headquartered here, and a lot of the fast-growing startups are headquartered here as well, because it's just a very it's a very rich and very easy ecosystem to get into to start off as a company. So, like half the people that you're going to meet here are startup founders.
Yeah,
which is incredible.
And that's one of your target clients, right? Is startups.
Right. So they were, especially when I first moved here, for sure. Because when I moved here, I started off as a solopreneur in media, so media creation and media strategy. And our specialization quickly became creating videos for the West. So helping Chinese clients that were creating products for overseas clients for the US and for European markets to really kind of help them create their brand story in a more international way, to really help them globalize their brands, basically, and to help them create video content for their socials, for their websites, and to help them do them all, not just in English, but also in a nuanced, internationalized way in terms of the cultural references. So that's what we were doing for a long time. And now I'm transitioning more into communications consulting, which is working with companies, not just startups, but also other more established companies, helping their leadership and helping their management basically refine their communication skills, whether it's interdepartmental, interpersonal communication skills at work, or helping CEOs, CMOs, or C-level execs create a public persona for the media, for themselves, for the company. For example, helping them with their next TED Talk, helping them with their next media interview on TechCrunch or on the BBC, helping them come up with their own public persona. So not just a personal brand, which I feel like is more of an online term, but like more of an offline plus online overall public presence.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, we're doing some of that around here in Canada too. And I can only imagine that the need is the same there as it is here for a lot of the leaders out there in corporate land, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially new leaders for sure, especially people that have just kind of either been promoted or people that are new entrepreneurs that have, are now at the head of very fast growing companies, and they just haven't had a lot of media exposure. I've literally, I've worked with people that are very senior that have never been in front of a camera. And now it's more important than ever, as we know, to be the face of the company. So just helping those people. Yeah.
So let's talk about how you got to where you are. We were talking earlier and you said you did some time in radio. I did some time in radio and that was a lot of fun. And you've done some filmmaking. How do you go from that and get to where you are now?
Yeah, it's a great question. One that I have been asking myself as well. Um, I, I would call myself a meanderer. And recently I was talking to a lot of other people in communications, and, they said, call yourself an explorer. That sounds better.
Right.
Meanderer is like without purpose, and an explorer like takes on the world. And I was like, sure, I'll do that. But I just told you I'm both. So, that defeats the purpose. But I have been a meanderer / explorer most of my life. I started off at Procter & Gamble. That's where my Fortune 500 experience comes from. And I was doing PR, marketing, communications there for 5 years. And that was really my first exposure to the corporate world, to the business world, and really kind of, like to an expression that you used earlier, I cut my teeth in communications there, which was great for establishing some systems, but also left some knowledge gaps in terms of being able to adapt to faster growing, less organized, less systematized companies, because Procter & Gamble had a lot of systems already in place. But that's where my journey started. And after 5 years, I wanted to take a break. So I quit. I traveled around for a bit, went to Nepal, took a road trip across Pakistan, had no plans, just wanted to do your cliched, quintessential self-discovery and really kind of understand who I was and what I wanted to do. A little bit of clarity came then, but not all. So I just kind of went in different directions. I did improv, I did theater, ended up doing comedy for a late night TV show, ended up making small videos that were really crappy. But that's how I kind of got into filmmaking. And then I got the Fulbright scholarship to go to New York. And I was in New York for grad school, went to the New School for Media Studies. That was amazing. And that's where I guess really learned how to be a filmmaker at, close to my 30s. So I was not one of those people that always had like a filmmaking dream. And I got that education and we came to China. My husband got a job here. So we decided to move from New York straight to China. It was surreal at the time because I had my New York friends saying like, are you really moving to China? That's where you're going next? So it was surreal, and it was surreal being here too, for sure. There was culture shock. Weirdly enough, there was no culture shock when I actually moved to the US because we kind of grew up with like American and British cultures most of our lives.
Right, sure.
So yeah, and when I went to the US, it was like, yeah, okay, this is America. All right, I get it.
Yeah.
It was
There's a McDonald's and a Starbucks down the street.
right, a Wendy's, like it's all good. I get it. All I had to do right in the beginning was change the way I pronounce certain words. So it had to be dance and not dance. It had to be bathroom and not bathroom, which is how I grew up. We grew up with like the British English, and to this day, my husband makes fun of me because now it's stuck. Like I can't go back to can't, and he says can't, and whenever I say can't, he makes so much fun of me. He's like, "What is wrong with you? Are you saying you can or you can't?"
And you can, yes. And especially in New York, right? New Yorkers have this very distinctive accent.
Yes and no. Yeah. I mean,
and I say this in my
so
Canadian
many
accent as we're speaking.
I mean, yes, I suppose a lot of New Yorkers do, but now there's just, and for a while, there's just so many people that come to New York from all over, and then they bring their own accents as well, which is beautiful. That was definitely something I loved about being there. And so, yeah, we came to China, and like I was telling you earlier, I started off doing just like solo work in film, and then did that for a while, for 5 years. And we were growing to the point where I started feeling burnt out post-COVID. Well, very, very much during COVID. It was a hard time for everyone, for all of us, where we all felt that, it was like company budgets were, dwindling, and you still had to get the same resources and, build the same product. And so on the one hand, you weren't getting enough support, and on the other hand, you were actually getting these resources that were getting more and more scarce because a lot of people were leaving China or had left China. For us, actually, because we would actually create videos for the West, we would actually need to use Western models. We would need to have a lot of other foreign resources working on our products, working on our project. It would just make sense. You would actually try to bring about like a mix of Chinese and foreign elements. But a lot of the creative direction was always set by us, because it would by the foreigner team, because it would make sense, because we're creating a product not for the Chinese market.
Yeah.
But it just it kept getting more and more difficult to a stage where it didn't make sense to do that anymore. And I also felt that filmmaking was great, but I was drawn to doing a more I don't want to say meaningful, because I know creating a video can be meaningful, and it was, but doing something that perhaps could have a more long-lasting impact, doing something that would also utilize more of my skills. I had been delivering workshops and trainings kind of sprinkled throughout my life for the past decade or so. And I also had a lot of marketing and communications experience that I was using in bits and pieces in the filmmaking work, but not to the extent that I really wanted to. A lot of because we talked about a lot of our clients being startups, a lot of them didn't really have a defined marketing strategy. Some of them didn't even have slogans. And, we would actually help them craft some of their brand messaging, even though that wasn't really what they had hired us for, but we had the skill set. So I realized it would make sense to actually offer this versus offering the executional product, which, to be honest, a lot of just a video team could produce the video, but what we were doing was more strategy and more consulting and more messaging. So why not just do that? Because it was more fulfilling anyway.
Sure.
So that's how I kind of ended up here, where I hope to do more of work. So when I want to work with companies, I want to work on their brand story, but then I also want to work with leaders and with management, with C-suite execs, helping them craft their own public personas, which is also something that I've been doing in terms of, our media and PR work.
Yeah, certainly. Well, hey, coming out of the media industry or the media sector, you certainly bring some transferable skills to a consulting role, right? And the beauty about consulting is you do get to choose which areas of expertise you truly want to focus on and help teach others, which is terrific. I think that can be tremendously fulfilling. Did you ever envision yourself in entrepreneurship when you were younger?
No. I came from a very traditional family, in the sense that traditional in the professional sense of the word, thankfully not in the cultural sense of the word. My mother was a fierce feminist, and I love her for that. But in terms of the professional world, yeah, my mom was a teacher. My dad was working in the government, and I don't think we've had a lot of entrepreneurship in our family. I'm actually from a family of mostly teachers, a lot of teachers. So people loved institutions. That's where they found safety. They were also coming from a generation that was traumatized by the war between India and Pakistan. They were all, my parents' generation were all children at that time. So they were coming from a place of like scarcity and, the mindset of like survival. So for them, like financial security was the biggest thing. So they wouldn't even encourage us to be entrepreneurs. It was always like, find the best possible job you can, get as financially secure as possible, get your independence. I was raised by a single mom. My dad unfortunately died when I was 10. So my mom raised me, and for her, the most important thing was like, don't ever depend on someone else for your financial security. Like, make absolutely sure you're financially independent. And that can, for her, it could only come from a full-time job. Yeah.
Interesting. So was there any entrepreneurial inspiration for you along the way? It didn't come from your family, I guess, right? But was there something else?
My husband was a huge supporter. So he's actually been a freelancer and an independent consultant for a long time. He quit like the corporate world, or like the full-time 9-to-5 world, maybe 15 years ago. And he's been just doing consultancy and doing freelance work. And for him, it's not scary anymore. And weirdly enough, he does come from a family of entrepreneurs. So even though it's not like neither one of us was like, rich or well off by any means at all, but we were, but because he was kind of conditioned in that way of like forging your own path and doing your own thing and finding your own way, he encouraged me to do that. So when we came to China, actually, was the first time that I actually started being an entrepreneur. I actually tried my hand at it, and it was very scary. Yeah. But fortunately or unfortunately, I was not very employable in China. I didn't speak the language. It would have been very hard for me to integrate myself, even culturally, into a Chinese company. I just wouldn't have made a good fit. I feel like I'm too much of a rebel perhaps, or a nonconformist in that way. So it wouldn't have made sense, and I wouldn't have been offered employment anyway. So it was kind of like entrepreneurship by default. Like, you just need to figure out what you can do here. Why don't you try figuring out like how you can be an entrepreneur in media? So it was very interesting, not just being an entrepreneur, but being an entrepreneur for the first time in a foreign country where I didn't speak the language.
Right. And all the challenges that come along with that.
Yeah. It was fascinating. It was a lot of growth. Definitely very out of my comfort zone at the time.
So where do you see your industry going? Especially in your geographic area where you're trying to kind of put this thing together and be successful. Where do you envision the industry as a whole and how you fit in?
So first, actually, I wanted to say that I do plan on working with other clients and not just Asian clients. We will hopefully also be making our transition out of China next year. We've been here 7 years. I think we've had a great journey, but it is time to move on. So we are looking at going to France next year. So nice. Yeah, my husband is French, and now I finally speak French. So it would be a good time, hopefully.
Yeah.
But that said, I have been working definitely with Asian clients so far, and it's a very different industry in Asia versus the rest of the world right now. In Asia, with not just the language barrier, but also the culture not being super extroverted, it's a much more like communications 101 type of industry here, where we work with leaders to really refine their basic communication skills in English, refine their media interviewing skills, refine their public speaking skills. And these are people who might not have spoken in public before and would definitely not have spoken in public in English before, even though they do speak in English, but it's never really the same. I don't know if do you have a second language?
I have a little bit of French because that's Canada, right? But I'm not fluent by any stretch.
Okay, so I don't know if you've ever tried to deliver a speech in French or tried to have a conversation. It would be very difficult, even if you spoke it fluently. But if it was your second language, it's very difficult to be the same person in a second language. And that's really what I work with leaders to deliver. Their confidence and their entire personality packaged for creating a public presence in a second language, because all those factors combined make it a huge challenge for anyone. I know it firsthand, because when I was learning French last year, I understood that for a while, it was just so hard to be myself. In English, which is basically, I grew up bilingual. So in English, it's very easy for me to convey my personality, to really be extroverted, be social, be open, be happy, be energized. But when you have a second language and a lot of your brain is just processing that, right? It's like a lot of your brain power is just like rerouted to make sure you're fluent, make sure you don't make a grammatical mistake. Oh, what was the word for that? Damn it. Okay, I'll come up with another word. So it's all that stuff happening. And then there's another part of your brain that's like, oh, must insert personality. Yes. But it's like it becomes a jumbled up mess. So, and that's definitely what you don't want to show on camera. That's not what you want to show in public when you're delivering a speech. You want to be poised, and you want to hold the audience's attention. You want to be deliberate. You want to be yourself. You want to be confident. So gaining that level of confidence in public is a challenge for anyone, even in their native language. So in that way, you could say like anyone who's creating a public presence in English as a second language definitely has like, you know, a double challenge to overcome. So that's where we are in the industry over here. In other parts of the world, especially in the US, where they don't have that language barrier, it's just so much more advanced because the industry can be advanced, and you know there's a lot more nuance to what communications consultants and communication coaches are bringing to the industry, which is super exciting.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. So we know some of the challenges.
Mm-hmm.
What have been some of your favorite things in your work?
Oh, the favorite thing is always seeing the transformations. It's and it's intense because in the first few stages, you know, the growth is exponential. The learning curve is exponential, and you can see it because we're all about visibility. So it's really when you first do the first steps, you know, the first media training, the first public speaking training with someone, after the first 2 or 3 sessions, when you're practicing with them and they're doing something that they've just learned for the first time, you can really see them trying to synthesize everything, integrate everything that they've learned and put it into practice. And it's something else we were talking about, you know, in terms of radio. It's immediately gratifying because the moment you practice it, you've done it. You've spoken in public. You've taken these skills and you've, you know, for example, we do a number of like mock interviews. I help people record their talks, and then we look over them and we analyze them. The moment you've delivered your first talk, even if it's just in front of me, you've done it. You've literally spoken in public. You've spoken to, you know, an external audience.
Yeah.
So it's
and
just
that's a
seeing
win,
a transformation.
Right?
Yeah. And like one of the execs we worked with, she'd like, you know, never given a media interview before. And it was incredible. Like we did a few sessions with her, worked with her for about 2 months. And then she did her first podcast. And doing a podcast is not easy. You know, you have to be on, you have to be quick to respond to questions. You can't really ask for the person to repeat themselves too many times. And you can't really go by a script. And she was able to do it. She did a fantastic podcast interview. And we were just so proud of her. So
that is terrific. Yeah. Well, sometimes we make podcasting look easy, right? And if we can, then we must be doing our job right, or at least doing it reasonably well. Anyway, that's the objective anyway for us. If it's not looking easy or not sounding easy, then boy, we've got work to do. But we've got work to do in just about everything all life long, don't we? And speaking of lessons, here's my segue. Speaking of life lessons or business lessons, just in terms of the entrepreneurial journey, the meandering or exploring, what has been the biggest business lesson for you so far?
Oh gosh. Cultural adaptation, I would say, has probably been the biggest one. I was coming into the Chinese culture with knowledge of American culture and Pakistani culture primarily. And I realized that even though China is officially a part of Asia and I'm Asian by being from Pakistan, it's like still 2 different worlds. And being able to culturally adapt, being able to speak to clients that don't come from the same culture, don't necessarily have the same shared references or cultural language as you, being able to talk to project resources, employees, and making things work in a completely different culture, you know, doing conflict resolution in a completely different culture was the biggest challenge and the biggest lesson, where I had to really adapt very fast. And I had to find a balance for myself, because it's for me at least, I feel like it's very easy being on two ends of the spectrum. One, which is like, I'm just going to be myself and people should just learn to deal with it. Or in the other end of the spectrum is like, I'm just going to completely change everything about me so that I can fit in. And I'm going to agree with all of these cultural values that I'm seeing because I just want to be a part of it. And admittedly, the second way can work. I have seen a lot of people integrate really well. But for me personally, especially because I was creating content, I was giving a product or service that was ultimately going to end up, in the West for a Western audience, it made sense to find a balance between the two. Definitely be adaptable in terms of the cultural setting. So, for example, respecting the hierarchy, which is not something I did before because I come from a more of like an American professional working environment because I was at P&G, which was very American, and we brought the American values in when we were working in Pakistan. But being cognizant of the fact that it works differently here, and for example, the boss gets the final say. That's just how it is, and everyone just follows that, and there's no need and no purpose in fighting that. So those are some of the cultural values that I had to adapt to. But then at the same time, sometimes being more in the, in a place of like coming from, I actually know more about this cultural nuance that will be interpreted a certain way in the West. Let me tell you about this because I believe maybe your perception might not be entirely correct. So sticking to some parts of what I know and the values that I bring. Work-life balance was one of them. Sometimes it's hard working with startups, especially Asian startups. I mean, I think startups in general just work a lot, and you have to, I think, in that journey. But especially Asian startups just have sometimes a very challenging work environment. And we as an agency had two choices. One, either to completely conform to that and be like, yeah, we're going to be available weekends. We're going to be available at 10 p.m. Or take a step back and set expectations and manage expectations and say that, we are committed. We will deliver on these timelines. We will promise you that we will deliver and we will make it happen. But we're not going to ask our team to stay overtime because that's bad for morale. And that's the world that we come from. And that's the culture we want to foster in our own little startup. A lot of times it worked. Sometimes it didn't. You also had to be flexible about that. So that has been the biggest lesson.
Flexibility, adaptation, open-mindedness, right? And just being aware of some of these little nuances or big cultural differences in some cases. I think a lot of people can learn from that story for sure. I want to shift gears a little bit. I've been, if you've been listening to some of the other episodes of this program, what I do with people as we wrap things up is we get into talking about where you live and what some of the fun stuff is around there. So you are in Shenzhen.
Yeah.
And if I were coming to play tourist there, what would I have to go and see?
Such a great question. First of all, I do want to tell you that if you were a tourist, you're probably better off going to Beijing or Shanghai because those are more touristy cities.
Okay.
There's a lot of Chinese culture there. There's a lot of history there. Shenzhen doesn't have as much history. Shenzhen is more for the, what would you call them? Like the industry visitor, the person who's more interested in the startup ecosystem. But that said, you can absolutely have a great time here. There are a number of very cool places. So while I said it doesn't have like that age-old history because it's a very young city, I believe maybe just about 40 years old. So very, very young. But there are a number of really interesting little artistic communities that have sprung up in different parts of the city. There's what we call an oil painting village, where if you go there, you'll literally see maybe dozens or hundreds of oil painters just kind of sitting at their easels and just kind of a lot of times making like replicas, a lot of times making original art. but it's literally just a village of oil painters, which is fascinating. There's for sure the beach, and we have many different types of many different kinds of beaches. It's always fun. I live next to the water. It's not the beach, but it's a bay, so it's very, very pretty. There's a very, very long promenade that you can just walk. You can walk on it for hours next to the water. So a lot of people go there to bike, just to like be next to the water. I go there for walks every week with my friend. It's very beautiful, and that's actually where you can see Hong Kong, just across the water. And in general, in the city, I would say that now we're starting to do more and more cultural events. Mm-hmm. There were always a number of events in Chinese, but of course, if you're a visitor, you might want to see a bit of that, but also a bit of English events. So there are a bunch of different events and communities springing up. I'm actually a part of a very vibrant community called Shenzhen Stories, just started by a friend of mine, and he gets together people every once in a while, sometimes every fortnight, just to tell stories. Just to come together and tell stories, true stories from their life about a specific theme. And it's a really cool event. And sometimes this is a city of, I believe it was maybe 13 million people, but sometimes the community feels very close-knit. I remember this one time I told a story at one of these events, and the next week I was walking down the street and someone pointed at me and said, "Oh, I heard you at Shenzhen Stories." And I was like, that is weird. That is just it's
Small
weird.
Town feel in a city of 13
Yeah. Yeah. So that definitely happens. I guess that's inevitable. It was very much like this in Karachi, which is the city I grew up in Pakistan. It was very much like this there too, because once you're that huge, kind of by default, you're literally going small. You need to create your own little bubble, whether that's for good or bad. I mean, it's got its pros and cons, but it was very similar there. It was like such a small world, even though we were also, I believe Karachi also kind of, I forgot how big Karachi is, but I think it also, it can like compete with Shenzhen. Okay. It's 15 million almost.
Wow.
So a little bit bigger.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Wow, incredible. Thank you for painting that picture, because, I don't get to travel the world quite as much as I would like to. So it's nice to talk to people where they're at and get a sense of what's going on around them. Nausheen, where can we find you?
For now, LinkedIn is the best place. Because I think we talked a little bit about this. I'm transitioning to my own independent communications consulting. So maybe by the time you have this up, my website would be online. I don't know when you're going to have this up, but my website would be 𝗄𝗶𝘁𝗵.com. So the first letter of my name, N, and then Sheen, like Martin and Charlie.com. But otherwise, LinkedIn would be the best place. Nausheen Ishtiaq Chen. And I'm very active there. I share a lot of stories about communications, about miscommunications, about how to be a better communicator. And I share every day. I've been on this 30-day LinkedIn challenge that a bunch of people, actually this one content creator came up with, and we joined in. And so we've been on a 30-day LinkedIn posting streak without a break. So it's been very cool.
You're doing the marathon of LinkedIn posting.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, okay. So 𝗄𝗶𝘁𝗵 𝗄𝗶𝘁𝗵.com it is?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll make sure we put that in the show notes, because these things are evergreen, right? Once they go up. So you just never know. We'll put that in the show notes, and otherwise LinkedIn is a good place to find you. I can vouch for your posts. You put up some good stuff. So
thank you.
Appreciate that. And it was really good to have this conversation. I like these kinds of interviews where I have people on who know how to fill the airtime, right? From our radio days, you get those people that have the one-word answers, and you have to have a list of 20 questions to try to fill the time, or 100 questions. But I appreciate people who can have good conversation. And this is, I've been lucky. I've had mostly good conversations, and this is certainly another one of them.
Thank you.
Communications consultant Nausheen Ishtiaq Chen in Shenzhen, China, soon to be France, though, at some point, not too long in the future. Really appreciate you coming on the program.
Thank you so much, Rob. It's been awesome talking to you. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and yeah, it's been fantastic. Thank you.
It's Dirt Road Journeys. Hey, if you like the program, I've had some conversations, as we just talked about, with a lot of other keen entrepreneurs around the world. You can check it out at dirtroadjourneys.com. Hope to see you in the next program. I'm Rob Deptford.